topic of discussion. And I just kind of went into this room not knowing what to expect. And Camilla absolutely blew my mind with what she was talking about. It was everything that, all the issues that we encounter in Irish dancing as parents, as teachers dealing with parents, or dealing is the wrong word, kind of just negotiating with parents. And I just thought it was phenomenal information. And I ran up to her afterwards, and she was being flooded by all these people, and said, I really need to write a chapter for my book. I had this book planned out with 12 chapters, and suddenly it became 13. And she very graciously agreed to do so. And she's very graciously here today. So I know we have people joining us by video later on, but what we'll do is we might make a start now, because I appreciate that it's just gone 1:30. So just to give you a little bit of information before I turn everything over to Camilla. So she is the head of the Welsh Research Advisory and Evaluation Group for the Child Protection and Sport Unit, which is a member of the Welsh Safeguarding and Sport Strategy Group, and the Youth Sport Lead for the Welsh Institute of Performance Science. And her research interests are concerned with understanding and enhancing the psychosocial experiences of children in sport, with particular focus on the influence of parents. She's the co-author of Parenting in Youth Sport, From Research to Practice, and co-editor of Sports Psychology for Young Athletes, and has published widely on topics such as parents' experiences in sports, parental involvement in sport, youth sport participation, and parent-coach relationships. Absolutely fantastic speaker. I know you're going to get a huge amount from what she has to say. So I'm going to mute myself now and turn over to Camilla. And as I said, if you have questions, you can just write them in the chat box, so you can keep them for after. So thanks a million, Camilla.
That's perfect. Thank you so much, and thank you all for joining us today. I hope that you will find this an engaging and interesting talk. As was mentioned, if you have any questions, please feel free to share them on the chat, although I may miss them as we go through. But if I do, just feel free to ask at the end. Hopefully I'll leave enough time, and if I don't, which may happen, then feel free to stay on or to get in touch via email or on Twitter. I'm always interested in sharing information. I can skip this slide because we just had a bit of an introduction, but I guess the key thing to sort of know about me is I've been doing research around the area of kind of parents' involvement in sport, particularly for about the last 14 years. I do acknowledge at the outset that this is a different environment to a dance environment, but having looked around at the literature around dance, it's an area that's not really been considered specifically, and looking at the things that we do know from sport, I do see that there's a lot of similarities that can translate. So apologies in advance if I use the wrong terminology occasionally. I try not to, but the word coach may creep in occasionally. But really my hope here is that I can give you some insights into how parents are involved in dance, particularly how we might want parents to be involved over the lifespan of an elite dancer. We're then going to talk a little bit around the complexity of parenting children. So I just became a parent 14 months ago, and all of the things I talked about before about how hard it was to parent, I now appreciate even more, particularly because I'm very sleep deprived. But we're going to talk particularly around the complexity of parenting children involved in dance. And I'm going to talk about how you might optimize your involvement. So in producing this presentation, I have really targeted it at parents, but hopefully if we've got people who are teachers or even dancers yourselves watching, you'll be able to pull out some of this information, and I will give a nod to the ideas as we go through. I don't love this format in terms of talking. I much prefer doing a live engaging presentation where I can walk around and really engage with everyone. So hopefully the ideas still come across in the same way. And if you have got your camera on, please feel free to give me a little smile or a nod to keep some of the energy going. So to start off with, why do we even care about parents' involvement? Obviously, parents are really, really important in the lives of everyone involved. And hopefully, you know, I think it's fair to say the majority of parents are always trying to do the very best they can for their children. When we talk about parents within performance settings, whether that's sport or dance or even kind of performing arts settings, we know that parents fulfill three very important roles. The first one is as a provider, and that's the role that I'm sure any parent is very familiar with. That's the getting up early, driving funding, traveling, making sure the kit is washed, making sure the clothes are prepared, making sure the competitions are entered, and all of those things that are sort of your basic requirements for having children involved in any activity. The reason that that provider role is really important is not only because it allows children to be involved in their activities, but it also communicates the amount of value that you place on something. So if you as a parent are investing a lot of money, investing a lot of time, putting a lot of emotional energy into providing opportunities and providing equipment, etc., for your child, what you're communicating to your child is, this activity is something that I really value. And what we know is that when children think that parents value an activity, then and if they think their parents think they're good at that activity, then they're more likely to engage in it for a longer period, and they're more likely to be motivated and feel competent to participate. So whilst you might just think that traveling around and making sure you're paying fees, etc., is just a requirement of having a child involved in dance, it actually communicates a lot more than that. And one thing to be really careful here is that children will often internalize what this means. So although you might not talk about the cost of things, or although you might not mention how tired you are because you've driven and spent all day at a competition, sometimes children will internalize and put pressure on themselves because they think, I need to return, I need to give my parents something back for everything that they've been doing. So it's something that has to be done, but it's just something to be aware of in terms of how are you talking about it, or how are you communicating around that. The second thing that parents do when supporting children involved in dance is you act as an interpreter of that experience. When we talk about you being an interpreter, what we're really trying to make reference to is the fact that as a parent, through the comments and the feedback that you provide, you help a child to make sense of their experience. So if the first thing you talk about after a competition is whether they beat other dancers, how other dancers did, what you thought of someone else's outfit, what you thought of a routine that another dancer had done, what you're communicating to your child is that it's important to compare yourself to others. In contrast, if the things you talk about are how well they did in comparison to their own previous performances, how hard they worked, how much they look like they enjoyed the competition or the performance, what you're communicating to your child is that those are the behaviors that you value and that are important. So going forward, those are going to be the things that your child's going to try and replicate. And then finally, as a parent, you're also a role model. We often talk about this in the sense of role modeling the activity. So if you dance, your children will see that and they're more likely to dance. If you're physically active, your children will be physically active. However, that also extends to your demonstration of sporting behaviours, the way in which you engage with others within the dance environment, etc. Obviously, all of these behaviours are always being witnessed by children and consequently impact on what they might want to do. So I always think after I list all those things that parents do, it's really important to say, I recognise that sounds like maybe standard things you're doing as a parent and maybe a little bit complex. It is tough. So we can very easily categorize it into these three categories of providing, interpreting, and acting as a role model. But that's not to say it's not difficult to do. And what I'm hoping to do through this presentation is really unpack some of that so you can fulfill those roles in the best possible ways. In addition to fulfilling those general roles, one of the really important things for a parent to be aware of is how you need to change your engagement or your involvement over the course of your child's participation. So when children are first involved in sports or first involved in dance, the key role of a parent is to make sure they're enjoying it, that they're having fun, that they engage in multiple opportunities, and really that they develop a love for that activity. During that period, when we talk about the interpreter role, one of the key things you want to be doing as a parent is instilling a belief in your child's abilities. So making sure they think they're good at what they're doing. Perceptions of competence, so how good we think we are at things, peak when we're children and they're really often unrealistic when we're children, which makes sense because we tend to tell children they're good at things. We don't tend to tell them they're useless, or I hope we don't. They then become a little bit more realistic as we move into the teenage years, because you start to compare yourself to others. And so when dancers move into what we would call the middle years or the early teenage years of dancing, one of the really important things for a parent to do is reinforce those perceptions of competence. Really make sure you are reinforcing to your child that they are good at what they're doing, and make sure that reference is around them as dancers, not in relation to others. The other things you need to be doing during those early adolescent stages is really trying to help your child to make their own decisions around dance, make sure that they have some autonomy and some control over what they want to be doing. You want to be providing appropriate support for training and performances, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. And also at this point, it's really important you work closely with educators, teachers, practitioners. The reason that that's so important is during this transition phase in early adolescence, there's the potential for a lot of conflict between parents and educators and teachers. The reason being that there's a shift in focus from parents being the most important and to some degree the sole influencer in a child's life to an educator or teacher starting to have more impact. And that can be tough for parents. It's hard to take a step back and to know that someone else may step in a little. So working closely with others at that point's really important. Then finally, as your child moves into what we'd call the later ages, so towards later adolescence, where they've really specialized in dance, and they really have made that call that they want to go as far as they possibly can to it. Now, as a parent, it's really about taking a backseat role, but being there as a source of emotional support. Even when your daughter or your son is into their late teens, they'll still be looking for the encouragement, the reassurance from you as a parent that they're doing okay. Unfortunately, increasingly so during this stage, there's still a need for the financial support to be in place. And in fact, we know that there's increasing requirements for financial support for a longest period of time throughout performance settings. So that's something that you're definitely going to continue to be reliant upon. The other thing that's really important as your daughter or son gets to the later stages is helping them to manage transitions. So when we're moving through performance settings, transitions are particularly difficult. So transitions at any time there's change, and they can be things that we expect. So they might be moving to a higher performance category, changing teachers. They might also be related to things like schoolwork, so taking exams, education, etc. But they can also be things that are unexpected. So suddenly dealing with injuries, not being selected for a performance, not being able to compete, etc. Those unexpected transitions can be particularly challenging when dancers are in that more specialized elite end of performance. And so as a parent, anticipating those transitions and being there for your child and really helping them to cope with them is going to be particularly important. And we'll talk about how you might want to do that in a little while. So I mentioned it already, and it's something that I think we sometimes as parents don't give ourselves or give each other enough credit for. We want parenting to be easy and straightforward. We particularly like to think that having children involved within a performance setting, we can follow a set path, set them along their way, do all of the right things, and they'll navigate it successfully. Unfortunately, as I'm sure you've experienced in your own lives, that's unfortunately not what it looks like. It's a maze, it's complicated. There's a lot of different things going on. And as a result of trying to navigate all of these different areas, sometimes you get it wrong. Sometimes you'll get it spot on, and sometimes there'll be bits that are just fine. And I guess you could take comfort in the fact that I've spoken to hundreds of children and adolescents involved within sports settings, and they recognize that at times their parents are going to do the wrong things. And at times they recognize that you'll never do the right thing, because whatever you do will be wrong, because they're disappointed or upset or they're angry or they're trying to Okay, apologies. I think I lost my internet.
Yeah, you're back. We have you
I'm
back. Yeah.
I said all the really important things while I was off the screen, but no. So sorry about that. So in terms of trying to navigate this, in terms of trying to take this maze and make it a little bit simpler, the first thing I just want to talk about is actually what parenting is. Now, this might not be something that you've ever really thought about as a parent before, but parenting works in a very specific way. Firstly, as a parent, we have specific goals and values that we want our children to achieve, to demonstrate. That's the process of socialization. So our goals and our values are set by how we were raised, the environment that we're in, and our own personal beliefs. To achieve those specific goals and values, to transmit those to your children, we adopt two things. We adopt a parenting style, and then we adopt specific parenting practices. So our parenting style is the general emotional climate that we create. And you may have heard terms such as authoritarian parenting, authoritative parenting, laissez-faire parenting. That's what we're talking about with parenting style. So this is the general climate that we're creating as a parent. Parents who are very strict, who have very set boundaries, who dictate quite a lot around what a child's going to do, would tend to be more authoritarian parents, whereas parents who have boundaries but let children have some control within them, who include children within decision-making and conversations, tend to be more authoritative. We would generally indicate that an authoritative parenting style is the best within a sport or a performance setting. However, there's a caveat to that, which is it's very culture dependent. And so whilst it might be seen as most appropriate within certain Western societies, within other societies, it's not necessarily the best one. But why do we talk about parenting style? Well, it's really important to understand the general climate that you're creating, because it dictates how the specific behaviors you engage in are understood. So those are your parenting practices. And it's through your parenting practices or the specific behaviors that you engage in that you ultimately will start to impact on what your child achieves, what outcomes they develop within a certain situation. So you might have created an authoritative parenting style, so your child knows that they have some boundaries, and then within that you might have some very strict rules about certain behaviors, and that would be fine because your child would understand them within that general climate. And so understanding the general climate and then those specific practices become really important. And they become important when we start to talk about involvement in sport, in performance settings, because when we talk about optimizing parents' involvement, we're going to talk about those two key things. So this looks like a complicated slide, I appreciate, but I'll try and make sure it's nice and simple. When we talk about how you might best be involved in your child's dancing life, the first thing you need to understand is it's your child's dancing life. So whether you danced or you didn't dance, whether you succeeded within different domains, the key thing here is understanding that the experience for your child is unique. That's what this is about. It's about your child's journey. And the reason we talk about a journey is recognizing that it extends over a long period of time. And over that period of time, there's going to be ups and downs, challenges, pitfalls, positives, all sorts of transitions happening. And as a parent, the most important thing you need to be able to do is take a step back and say, am I following their journey? And to be able to engage in that way, the first thing that we talk about is the importance of shared and communicated goals. So when your child first got involved in dance, I'm sure you had some specific aims. Maybe you wanted them to just have fun with their friends. Maybe you thought they might go on and compete and be successful. Maybe you thought that they might get selected for performances. Maybe you just wanted them to have to stay fit, and dance was a way to do it. Or maybe they went to school, had some fun with their friends, and their friends were dancing, and so they just decided to go along. Whatever your reasons for your child being involved in dance, they've probably changed over time, or they might change over time. But similarly, your child's going to have different reasons for being involved. And the biggest issue that we see within child and parent relationships is when there's a difference in those goals. So if you are thinking that dance is really a great way for you and your son or daughter to make friends, but they're thinking it's a really important avenue for them to go on and be successful in the future, straight away you're going to have different purposes to your involvement, and consequently the sorts of things you say, the sorts of feedback you give might not match up. One of the things that's really important to raise here is the fact that lots of academics, lots of practitioners would say the most important thing to always focus on in any performance or evaluative setting is having fun or enjoying the situation. If you've got a child who's highly committed to their participation, whether it's in sport or in dance, if you've got someone who really wants to go on and succeed, continually focusing solely on fun and enjoyment isn't going to give them what they need. The most important thing is making sure your support is responsive. And responsive means that you are demonstrating that you understand your child and that you care for them. And to do that, you need to know, what are they trying to achieve through their participation in dance? And does it match with what you're trying to achieve? And remember, these things will change over time. So it might be that they're in the year before major exams and suddenly there's a lot of pressure on schoolwork and what they might go on and do in the future. And so their values or their goals for dance might change. And understanding why they might change and how they might change is going to be really important for you to provide the appropriate support. So identifying these goals is key, and we'll talk about how you might do that in a moment. Having established these shared and communicated goals, the next thing is around developing this understanding emotional climate. So that's that parenting style aspect that we talked about. And when we talk about developing an understanding emotional climate, what we're talking about is creating an environment where your child feels that you understand the challenges that are associated with dance. So for instance, do you recognize how tired they are sometimes, the challenges of fitting it in around schoolwork? I don't know why they might be so hungry after training, that there's certain practices that they really don't like, that, you know, there's certain costumes or certain outfits that they might not want to put on, etc. Do you understand what it's like to be an elite dancer? The second one is, do you understand the intricacies of dance development? So do you understand what they've got to go through, how they're going to progress, the different requirements that are placed on them? And then finally, do you understand how dance fits within your child's life? So is it the most important thing? Does it fit alongside schoolwork? Are they aiming to become a professional? Does it come secondary to socializing, etc.? So how does it fit in their life? And by addressing those three areas, what you can do is continually demonstrate to your child that you understand what they're going through, or you're attempting to understand what they're going through. And to do that, there's a few different things that you might want to consider as a parent. Firstly, do you have a good relationship with your son or daughter's teacher or educator? They are going to be one of your main sources of information to understand what it is like to be a dancer, if you haven't been one yourself. So working closely with the teacher, identifying when it's appropriate to ask them questions, sharing information from around your own background, and really starting to develop rapport so you feel you can use them as a source of information is important. Secondly, you can engage in independent learning. Obviously, Google is a great source of information, but try and avoid some of the random websites. I'm sure within the dancing communities that you're working, that your children are based, there's specific guidance that might be available to you as a parent, or talk to other parents who've been through it, other parents who are experiencing it can give you a lot of information that's useful to just broaden your understanding. The other two things that are really important to develop this understanding climate is keeping dance in perspective and focusing on all of the different benefits that can come from participating. Now, as a parent who's maybe invested substantial amounts of time, money, emotional energy into your child's dance, I'm sure it can be hard to keep it in perspective at times. It might be challenging to think that actually it's just one element of your child's life, but keeping dance in perspective will allow you to see how it fits into the broader life. And focusing on all the different benefits is really a valuable way to do this. So if you just indulge me for a moment, I'll tell you a little bit about my own background. So I grew up playing tennis, and I was never amazing, but I was good enough. I spent most weekends traveling to tournaments around England with my dad, and I competed at kind of county regional levels. And in the end, I went off to play in the States on a scholarship, which was something that was really amazing for me. All the way through my participation, though, I knew I wasn't going to be an elite tennis player. But actually, as a result of participating, I made friends, I traveled around, I think I got much better at concentrating, etc. But actually, as a result of it, I moved to the States when I was 18. I did my undergrad dissertation on tennis parents, which has led me down the career path I've done. It gave me an opportunity to do a PhD over in Canada, where I got to play different tournaments over there, etc. So although initially I think my parents thought they wanted me to play tennis to have a bit of fun and have something to keep me fit, it gave me all of these different benefits that maybe we weren't aware of at the time. And as a parent, if you can just think about all the different avenues that may open up to your child as a result of their participation in dance, I'm sure it will help you to see where all the time and money and emotion is really paying off. So that helps you to develop an understanding emotional climate. Then on the other hand, there's these specific practices. So these are the behaviors that your child would need or would like you to demonstrate at specific performances. The key thing here is they're going to be specific to your child. So the first one is around attending to their performance needs. So when your child's going to compete or going to perform, what do they need from you? Have you had a conversation about what they would like you to do or to say in the lead up to that situation? Do you know what they would like you to do whilst they're out competing or performing? And then after the event, what is it that they find particularly beneficial? This will vary across different children, and there's no do's and don'ts that are sort of rigid here, but in general, giving your child space and time to kind of ensure that they are mentally and physically prepared in the lead up is usually important, as is giving them space and time to digest a performance after an event is particularly important. But to know about your child's needs, you're going to need to talk to your child. And that might seem like the simplest suggestion that anyone's ever given you. And it may seem overly simple if you've got teenagers who don't really want to chat with you. But if you can communicate regularly around how they're perceiving what you're doing and what they would like from you, that's particularly useful. The next thing is helping your child to cope with the performance or the competition experience. So going out and competing is always tough. Going out on a stage is going to be particularly challenging, especially if you maybe don't feel like you're in control of your emotions, or you might get anxious or upset. So working with your child and maybe pulling in mental performance coaches to help them learn how to cope with their performance will make life easier for you as a parent, because one of the biggest factors that impacts on what you as a parent will do when your child is competing is responding to your child's emotions. So if your child's disappointed, then you as a parent will often feel disappointed. If your child seems anxious, you might seem anxious. So the better your child can cope with the situation, the easier it will be for you to be involved in the best ways, which links into you being able to manage your own emotions. I feel very fortunate to have spoken to maybe 2,000 plus parents over the course of the research that I've done around the experience of having children involved in sport. And one of the biggest things that parents talk about is just how emotionally charged the environment is. And I can only imagine it's the same within dance. Understandably, you're going to have emotional reactions to the situations you find yourself in. But being able to manage those emotions and being able to cope with the different situations yourself is going to be really important to allow you to respond appropriately to what your child needs or wants. So we're going to talk through a few specific strategies around how you might hit those different areas. If I can change. Oh, okay. So the first thing that we want to talk about is understanding the goals that your child's trying to achieve. So what are they trying to achieve? What is your son or your daughter trying to achieve? Why are they involved in dance? Have you spoken to them about what they're trying to achieve? If I was to ask you right now, and I won't, to write in the chat, this is what my child is trying to achieve in dance today, on whatever day it is, the 28th of October, would you feel confident that you could write down exactly what it is they want to achieve and what they're hoping to get out of their performance? If you're not confident in that, it might be a great opportunity to engage in some conversation with your child and to understand, for instance, that living through a global pandemic may have changed how they view dance currently, and it may have impacted on their goals or what they want to achieve. Once you do know those goals and those goals of your child, you also need to spend some time thinking about whether that's reflected in your behaviors. So if your child was to say to you, actually, I've got a lot of schoolwork going on at the moment, I've just entered a new 5-week lockdown, I'm not finding life all that easy at the moment, I just want to start thinking about dance for fun, would you as a parent be able to shift your own goals or your own hopes for your child's engagement and demonstrate that in your behaviors? Would you be able to talk about fun and focus on, those elements, or would you maybe still be caught up on them potentially going down an elite route? So the key here is talk to your child, find out what it is they want to achieve, and then think about your own goals. And are you able to shift your goals to meet your child's current goals, recognizing that they may change again over time? After that conversation, it's then around unpacking this understanding emotional climate. So whilst you're having that conversation around goals, you might also want to encourage your son or your daughter to engage in some self-reflection. So think about what it is they like about dance, what they find challenging about dance, what it is they think they need you to know about dance, how they see dance fitting within their everyday life. And if they have an opportunity to spend some time thinking about that, maybe they'll feel comfortable sharing that with you or with their teachers and their educators. Because often we talk about parents creating an understanding emotional climate, but you can only do that if you know what's going on for your child, and they need to spend time thinking about that. So again, it's about having a conversation with your child and encouraging them to share with you their current situation and their current feelings around dance. The caveat to these conversations, or the important point to these conversations, is you have to be open to hearing what your son or your daughter is going to say. So if what they're going to say is maybe different to what you were anticipating or different to what you were hoping, you need to be in a situation where you can respond in a way that actually demonstrates to your child that you are hearing what they're saying, that you do value what they're sharing with you. Because if we shut them down, if we dismiss the ideas or don't listen to the things they're telling us, then they're unlikely to share them again in the future. The other thing, and actually maybe during a lockdown period's the perfect time to do it, is taking an opportunity to really learn about dance and all of the different changes that occur through a dancer's journey. That might be through reading autobiographies, it might be through talking to former dancers, if you know them, talking to other dancers who are involved, other parents who are involved, talking to your child, asking them to talk to you about what they know about dance. Really immersing yourself in the culture can be really valuable. This is always an interesting point, because in the past, I think a lot of parents have been told to just stay out of it. Don't try and learn about the sport. Don't try and learn about dance. Stay out of it. Leave it all to the teacher or the educator. But actually, as a parent, you're going to want to have conversations with your child. So the more you're informed, the better you're going to be able to support them. And all of my engagement with children tells us that they want to have conversations with you. They want to know that you're interested in what they're doing, and they much prefer it when that comes from an informed place than a situation where you don't really understand. And then the other thing is actually trying to learn about the benefits that your child is gaining from dance. I think we very easily fall into, yes, they're getting physical benefits, but also what about social benefits, psychological benefits, the networks that they're creating, maybe the confidence they're getting from performing. Try and think about all of these different things. And then if you find yourself getting caught up in maybe the emotions of a performance or a competition, can you recalibrate and come back to, okay, this is actually bigger than just this performance. This is an opportunity moving forward. This is something else that's happening. And then finally, this is about what your child needs at the competitions and in a performance. So again, and you'll see there's a consistent theme here. Talk to your child, learn about what they like when they're performing. And they may not know, because they may just be used to you doing something that you've always done. But talk to them about what they think is the intent of behaviors. So if you say good luck, what do they think that means? Why are you saying it? If you talk about competitors, what do they think you're trying to imply? Sometimes, or actually quite consistently, we know there's a disconnect between what children are perceiving their parents are implying or doing and what parents think they're doing. So having a conversation around how behaviors are being interpreted and what your child wants from you is really important. To help you cope with your own emotions, try and spend some time thinking about what scenarios you might encounter at different competitions or different performances. What could happen? An injury. How would you respond? What would you do? What would your daughter or your son need you to do in that situation? Maybe they're in an event where they're being judged and you feel that the judging's been harsh or inappropriate. What would you do? How would you perform? A competitor's come out and absolutely nailed their performance just before your son or your daughter's going out. How would you respond in that situation? Your daughter or your son's had a terrible experience. It's all gone wrong. How would you respond? The more that you can think through different scenarios, the better prepared you'll be going forward. And then finally, having thought about those scenarios, the most important thing is thinking about how you might cope with your emotions. So if you are a parent who gets particularly anxious, do you have any strategies that you can put in place to cope with that anxiety? For instance, my dad used to watch me play tennis, always reading a newspaper. He always knew what was going on, but he was always sat behind a newspaper. It masked his emotions. It gave him something to do. And I just kind of got on with playing. My mum, however, never came to watch me compete because it was something that she found very stressful and challenging. She stayed at home and did her own thing. And that was how she coped, by not being in the environment. So having some strategies to help you cope with the emotions that you might experience can be really useful. That might be staying away from other parents. It might be taking something to distract you. It might be listening to music so that you're not having to focus too much on what's going on. It might simply be knowing that you have a support network that you can talk to after the event to offload if necessary. So really, what we're saying here is, for you to be best involved in your child's dancing life, you need to talk to your child. What do they want to achieve? How does dance fit into their life? And what is it that you need to know about dance? And what would they like you to do when they're performing or competing? You need to spend some time learning about dance and learning about the sorts of situations and scenarios that you may encounter yourself. And then you need to try and spend some time thinking about, well, what might I do to cope with any emotions or situations that I experience? However, what we've talked about so far is all around what your child needs. And I think that's great. That's obviously why I've shared it. I think it's really important that we do think about what a child needs and how you as a parent might go about addressing those needs in the best possible ways. But I also think it's important that you as parents have an opportunity to recognize everything that's going on for you and how that might impact on what you're able to do for your child. So as a parent, you probably don't spend too much time thinking about what's going on for you as a parent. You probably get up and know, I've got to keep my son, daughter alive, fed, get them to school, get them through the general everyday requirements of life. You probably have your own life, things that you need to deal with. You have to manage your work demands, expectations on you, maybe within the home or outside of the home. You then have to continually navigate what society thinks parents should be doing, and people always have a view on whether a parent is doing the right thing or the wrong thing. We have this portrayed continually within the media. These are good parents, these are bad parents. When I use this example of athletes, but when the Olympics is on, suddenly parents are amazing, and these parents are getting interviewed because they've produced these elite athletes who've gone on to succeed. But generally we slate parents when we talk about how awful they are at competitions and all of the things they're doing wrong. So as a parent, you've got all of that kind of to navigate. And then within dance specifically, you need to do all of the things that your son or your daughter needs. You have to try and address the things that your son or your daughter's teacher needs. And then when you go to a competition or a performance, you have to deal with all of the things that are required of you within that situation. So on a day-to-day basis, by having a child involved within an elite dance setting, there's a lot of pressure on you as parents. There's a lot of pressure that's specific to dance, but there's also all of the pressures that are more generally associated with parents. And unfortunately, what we encounter is a situation where lots of people like to judge parents, and they consider parents' behaviors out of context. So they might stand on the sidelines at a competition and say, oh, look at that parent saying the wrong things or doing the wrong things or getting too emotional. But actually, when you're under a lot of pressure, when there's a lot of demands and a lot of stress being placed on you as a parent, it does dictate how you parent. And the more pressure and the more challenges and the more demands that you're encountering, the more likely you are to engage in what we would call punitive behaviors. So more of the critical behaviors, placing pressure on your child, etc. So until we can understand what's going on for parents, until we can start to address some of the things that are going on for parents, we're always going to struggle to really enhance how parents are coping. So what I want to focus on just for these last sort of 5 or so minutes before we open up for some discussion is what is going on for you as parents. So this is research drawn from sport, but I've thought around dance as much as I could. And I think that they generally would apply. So as a parent, we know that there's performance or competition stresses. So there's stress associated just with watching your child perform. My very first study with a parent was about stresses of watching your child play tennis, and a mum summed it up for me. She said, it's like watching my daughter do a maths exam and put all of the wrong answers in, and there's nothing I can do about it. So you sit there completely helpless. There's nothing you can do, and you just have to hope that they perform as they want to perform, knowing that you have to pick the pieces up. So if it's gone wrong, it's down to you usually to make sure they feel okay to sort of put everything back together. So that's challenging for parents. It can be challenging interacting with other parents. That might be because you've had conflicts or issues with them, or simply you prefer to have time on your own. It can be really difficult if your child's not behaving in a way that you would want. So maybe you're seeing an attitude that you were hoping you wouldn't see when they went out to compete or were preparing for a competition. And maybe they just didn't prepare in the way that you were hoping. So maybe I was a classic when I went to play tennis. I would never warm up. It drove my dad mad. He'd always go and warm up. And I was like, no, I'll be fine. I'll just go and play. So those sorts of challenges can really add to the stress that you experience as a parent. Then you have what we would call the organizational stresses, the financial commitment, the time demands that maybe impact on working hours, the time you can spend with other siblings, etc. Issues around favoritism. There's always favoritism issues in all performance domains. Things around managing injuries, getting to physios, knowing the right things to do, being selected for teams performances, etc. Those are the general organizational stresses. And then there's developmental stresses. So as a parent, you're responsible for managing all of the demands your child's experiencing, thinking around their future within dance, outside of dance. How are they managing dance alongside their education? How might that impact on social opportunities? Do they get to go to birthday parties, spend time with their friends, etc.? Do they have other hobbies, or are they solely focused on dance? Even just listing these always makes me feel a little bit stressed. And I don't say them to make you feel stressed. I say them so that you can start to realize that there's a lot going on for you as a parent. And actually, sometimes we might say or do the wrong thing, but it's actually as a result of maybe the environment or the challenges that we're facing. So committing some time to yourself to be able to manage the stresses or the demands can be really useful. And when we've engaged with parents, they've given us a range of different ideas which help them to cope with the stresses and the challenges they encounter. So firstly, it's having access to a support network. If there's one thing that consistently seems to help parents, whether they're in sports or performance settings, it's knowing that there's other parents going through it, that there's other people they can draw on for tangible support, so maybe lifts, taking a child to competition if needed, but also just having someone who gets it. Because lots of people outside of the environment won't get what you're going through. So do you have some people that you can draw on? Do you have a network of people? If you don't, is there an opportunity within your child's club or through talking to teachers to set up some sort of network, some social opportunities so parents can get to know each other and have an opportunity to learn and engage with each other? The second one is around reflecting. So as a parent, do you have an opportunity to reflect on the experience that you're having and the things that you would like to change? That's not necessarily a long, extensive sit down and write in a journal for hours and hours. You don't have the time to do that. But at the end of a day, could you think back to maybe some of the conversations you had with your son or your daughter about dance, about the behaviors you engaged in, and is there anything that you might like to change? The other thing is around sharing knowledge. So working with other parents, working with teachers, working with people who've been through it before, and sharing the experiences that you've had can be both cathartic, but also really beneficial for other people. So learning from each other and sharing the insights that you have can be very beneficial. Taking the time to talk with your child's educator or teacher. I know that there's a lot of time pressures, and I know that teachers and educators and coaches don't always want to make the time for parents, but having a mutually agreed upon time where you might be able to talk about what's going on and how you might cope with the different challenges and stresses can be really, really useful. Aligned with that is talking to your child and helping them to cope with the situation that they're going through. So the better that children are able to cope with the different demands, the easier it is for you as a parent. So that might be teaching them some basic psychological skills. It might be seeking professional help to do that if you don't feel confident doing it yourself, but also just really providing them with some suggestions and strategies to manage the different demands they're encountering. You might also spend time, as I mentioned before, engaging in individual learning and research. So how can you cope better with the demands you're encountering? You can anticipate them. So if you spend some time learning about what's to come, you can prepare yourself for what's ahead. And if all else fails, and this is the one that our parents often go to, just find someone you can vent to. Find someone that you can offload to when it all feels too much and too stressful. Parents often talk about the need for either alcohol or coffee in this situation, but recognizing that sometimes you just need an opportunity to vent, to download, to clear the decks of the different stress and emotions that you might be experiencing, is really a valuable tool to just go, okay, now I'm in a position where I can now support my child because I've got rid of the challenges or the stresses that were playing on my mind. So I guess to conclude, so that we've got a bit of an opportunity for some questions, if you'd like, hopefully through this talk, what I've been trying to show is that you really are a very important part of the journey. Without you, your son or your daughter wouldn't be involved in dance and definitely wouldn't have succeeded to the levels that they've succeeded. But there's always strategies and there's always ways that we can make sure that parents are involved in the best possible way and to maximize the influence that you are having in your child's dancing life. And to do that, the most important thing is communicating. Communicating is so important, and it's something that we often take for granted because we get into the routine or the monotony of we go to dance, we go to practice, we go to compete, we get up and we do it again, and we just assume that we're all enjoying it and everyone's doing it for the same reasons. But communicating around the reasons, communicating around what's going on for your child and particularly what they would like from you is really important. But for you to be able to engage in your child's dancing life in the best possible way, take some time and really reflect on what's going on for you as a parent. Is there anything that's impacting on you that's preventing you from being involved in the ways that you want? Or is there anything that you need to do or could benefit from doing that might allow you to be involved in a more positive way or make life a little easier for you? Because ultimately, if you as a parent are having an enjoyable experience and managing to see some benefits for yourself through this experience, then you're going to be better positioned to be able to help and support your child going forward. That's everything from me. That's a lot of information, I appreciate. So if anyone wants to ask any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. I have realized, though, I did promise I would mention one thing and I forgot on the slide that I'd made notes on to mention it. Current situations with dance, sport, etc., different things being locked down for COVID and probably being opened up lockdown for a long period of time, that can be really challenging for you as parents and also for the dancers. Three things I would mention. One, there's huge benefits of recovery. Huge benefits. And so actually what the elite athletes who have come back in have said is, I'm performing better or at least equal to I was before lockdown because they've never had this period of time to just let their body recover before, or they've worked on different aspects so they're stronger than they've ever been. So there's huge benefits to having time out. The second one is making sure that when your child does return that you do it sensibly. There's some really good return to play guidelines out there for athletes, and I'm sure that many of them would apply to dance. So making sure it's steadily sort of reintroduced. And the third one is making sure that you as a parent recognize that the transition back in may be challenging for your child. It may have changed their goals or what they're trying to achieve. And so that communication I talked about is really, really important as they re-enter and they're trying to navigate the situation. So sorry, I was meant to say that on a slide earlier, but hopefully that's helpful as well.
Thank you, Camilla. That was amazing. It reinforces everything that I thought when I saw you speak the last time. It's just really relatable, practical stuff that we as parents need to know and think about. And I think like nothing would happen in Irish dancing without parents. End of. You know, teachers can do as much as they want, but the parents are the backbone of it. And sometimes we don't know what's the best thing to do. And just to have that advice is really fantastic. And thank you for mentioning around the current situation and return to practice. And it's frustrating here because they were back and they've just all been shut down again. It's been difficult because they were shut down for so long and they were all doing Zoom lessons, and then they did get back and there was some competitions in some jurisdictions, but here in Ireland at least it's been shut down again, and that's very hard for dancers and teachers and parents and everybody really. I'd like to ask if anybody has questions there. I see a good few people on. If you have any questions, you can just unmute or you can type in, whichever would suit you.
I'll ask a question if that's okay. Hi, Camilla, how are you?
Hi.
Thank you so much. Really, really, really interesting talk. I suppose one of the things I find where I struggle, I suppose, is, you know, your child is young, okay? So you want your child to still go to her birthday parties, to still do other sports, other activities, not to put all her, you know, time and effort into one activity, because if, you know, if that doesn't work out, she has left, you know, it's very hard to go back and do other activities. Mm-hmm. But then your head is switched between, okay, if I cut her classes from 4 to 3, or if I decide to not go to a competition at the weekend and let her go to the birthday party, then you're not in your sports 100%. Mm-hmm. You know, your dance 100%. It's a really hard one, because if you say, well, if I'm in this and I have set goals, I want to try and give it 100%. And I always want you to try to give your kids 100%. But then your head is going, well, I want everything, you know. How do you get the balance right, I suppose, is the question, you know.
It's a really challenging one, and that's actually why we talk about that as one of the stresses, is how do you navigate that as a parent. But I think where I personally, is my son's only 14 months, so he's very young on this journey. But my hope for him as I go forward is I'll always sort of go back to the literature, and the evidence consistently says that early specialization or specializing too soon is physically damaging. And so actually there's huge benefits for participating in a range of different activities. But also we know that from an identity perspective, it's really, really important for children to engage in a variety of activities. So not just dance, but sort of with their social aspects, their academic aspects. Because if athletes or dancers are children, let's just call them children, going forwards are likely to burn out, it's often because they've developed this foreclosed identity. So they focus solely on being one thing, a dancer, too soon. And they didn't explore different opportunities. So it's really hard because the culture within performance domains is focus on this thing, do it 100%. The more is better. But actually all of the scientific literature would imply that that's not the case, that actually missing a session and going to a friend's birthday party or not going to a competition is hugely beneficial, because it ensures that psychologically they're developing as we would want in terms of an identity perspective. And also the benefit of that is if they suddenly get injured or if something happens and they can't dance, they've got other things to fall back on. So I can feel the challenge, and it's something that parents talk about a lot. But if you can take comfort in the fact that actually there's many more benefits of maybe missing a session than attending every session. I worked very closely, I'll just give this as an anecdote, I worked very closely with a football academy, and we were talking about 16-year-old boys, and they just play football. They play football a lot. And actually one of the best things we did was I talked to a coach and I asked them to give them Valentine's Day off, because you had loads of 16-year-old boys who just really had girlfriends for the first time or boyfriends, and they wanted a chance to see them for the night. And the benefit that we saw for a number of weeks after, because they had that session off, was huge, because actually they were allowed to be normal, whatever normal is, typical teenagers for a night. So it's tough, but definitely having that balance is important.
Excellent, thank you.
Anybody else have any questions? I think that's a fantastic relief for lots of people. Giving their kid a break is great news. You know?
Can I ask a question?
Just not feeling guilty. Just feeling guilty. Oh, I should be. You know, it's great to know. No, I'm doing the right thing. Absolutely. You know, this is actually going to benefit her long term. Yeah. Thank you.
Anita, have you a question?
Yeah, I was just keep thinking about it, because like they haven't danced now competed in God almighty months, like since January or February. And then we had an opportunity to compete in October, and there was a great excitement, like I can finally go on stage and do it and do the dances for the first time, and then panic set in. And for a full week before it, now unfortunately the competition didn't even happen at the end, but a full week it was panic, like what will happen? And no matter how hard you try to kind of say like, it doesn't matter, it's the first competition in 8 months, like just go and have fun, just try and enjoy it. I could just see like it was just going through, like there was no taking in.
And so that comes back to that idea of actually knowing what their goals are, right? So we might say it's the first competition, have some fun, but if you were planning on being able to dance, then had this big break and then suddenly you get your opportunity, you can understand that's really important. So the key thing in that situation would be trying to give is it son or daughter?
Daughter.
Your daughter a specific focus. So rather than I'm going to go out and I've got to absolutely nail this performance, it's actually, what about this performance would you like to go out and do really well? So try and give this sort of a specific process goal. So something within it that that's under their control, that actually, okay, you know what, I haven't been able to dance for 8 months. There's the potential that I might do bits wrong, but this is the thing that I'm going to really focus on. And this is the bit I'm going to, you know, try and do well. And that gives us sort of a tailored down focus, and it gives them something that's more under their control to go out and focus on. The other thing is actually just allowing them to recognize that it's okay to be anxious. And actually, anxiety is not a bad thing for a performance. Anxiety is our indicator that this is something that's important to us, that we're ready to go and do. And actually, you know, trying to normalize those feelings a little bit so that they recognize that they can go out and compete when they're anxious is not a bad thing either. So I would say, you know, giving them a specific focus, normalizing the situation is important, but also don't try and shift the goals too much. So if they have never gone out to compete focusing on fun, they're going to struggle to do that suddenly now, right? That's a complete mindset change for them. So if your daughter always goes out and competing is really important, it's always going to be really important. So now it's just around how do we manage that situation and tailoring it down, shrinking it down to something under her control.
I think it's a part of, but what I felt was, you know, when they're competing on a regular basis, to a certain extent, they are used to feeling or preparing. So the week before, the class before, the day off, the morning off, the whole process is very familiar.
Yeah.
You know, we had a huge gap now, like, and whether you want to or not, you do kind of forget, for the lack of a better word, you forget what it feels like, the build up to it, because the build up to it is the big thing. You know, like they all practice, but like feeling that way for a week, it's kind of.
So what you might want to do in the situation as you're maybe preparing again is, you know, especially during this lockdown period again, is encouraging them to reflect on previous performances, good performances. So try and get them to think about when they've performed well and actually talk you through or talk themselves through what it was like in that build up. Actually, what did I do and how did it feel? So whilst they can't physically do it, you can reflect on the experiences, because we've got them all banked. They're all banked. I can still tell you exactly how I would feel going out to compete. So actually you can normalize it and get them used to it by maybe talking through it, encouraging them to sort of play it through, use some imagery if they can, to kind of go through the situation. And also, if you know where the competition's going to be and what's going to happen, you can also flip that forward. So get them to talk about how they anticipate feeling in the lead up. So again, it's around keeping it, as you said, something that they're used to experiencing. There's no way of replicating it, but the more you talk about it, the more that they're used to it, you know, the more they've shared it, probably the better positioned they'll be.
Yeah, thanks for that. Thanks.
Has anybody else any questions? Okay, perfect. Camilla, I'd like to thank you so much. I think that was just absolutely amazing. I think any parent of a dancer or an athlete would be very lucky to listen to that presentation. Just so much really useful information. I'm going to stop recording now. So just to make you aware,